My sister and her arrogant fiancé kicked me out of my own home on Thanksgiving, publicly humiliating me. They thought they had secured my assets, so I made one phone call and orchestrated a morning of absolute financial ruin. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was burning up. The thermometer had read 102. For just an hour before I forced myself out of bed, splashed freezing water on my flushed face, and tried desperately to mask the dark, exhausted circles under my eyes with a heavy layer of concealer. It was Thanksgiving, after all. For the last 10 years, ever since I turned 20 and had to become the absolute bedrock of our shattered family, I was the one who hosted. I was the one who bought the massive 20-pound organic turkey, who made sure the cranberry sauce was made from scratch just the way our mother used to make it, who paid for the imported vintage wines, and who arranged the lavish, sprawling centerpieces that decorated our long dining table. I was 30 now, and the sheer, accumulated exhaustion of running a high-pressure software architecture firm was finally catching up to my weakened immune system. My joints ached with a dull, throbbing intensity that made standing difficult, and every single breath felt like inhaling dry, powdered glass. But I pushed through the blinding pain because family was everything to me. Family was the only reason I had worked myself to the bone. I walked slowly down the grand, sweeping mahogany staircase of the house I had bought with my own blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. The dining room was already buzzing with lively conversation. My younger sister, Bella, looked radiant in a stunning silk designer dress that I had paid for just a week prior. Next to her sat her fiancé, Cameron. Across from them was my older brother, Roman, who was already on his third heavy pour of the expensive, aged scotch I kept locked in my private study. "Layla, finally," Cameron said, his voice slicing sharply through the warm, festive ambience of the room. He didn't stand up to greet me. He didn't offer a sympathetic smile for my obvious pallor or my trembling hands. He simply swirled his wine glass, leaning back in the custom-upholstered captain's chair as if he owned the entire estate. "We were beginning to think we'd have to carve the bird without you. I was just telling Roman here about my new venture's Q3 projections." "I'm sorry," I managed to croak out, my throat tight and scratchy. "The fever is just really knocking me down today, but I'm here now. Everything smells wonderful. Let's eat." I moved weakly to take my usual seat at the head of the table. The chair I always sat in. The chair that symbolized everything I had built, protected, and provided for us over a decade of relentless sacrifice. "Actually, Layla," Bella said, her voice unusually sharp and clipped. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed intently on the gold rim of her water glass. "Cameron is going to sit there tonight." I paused, my shaking hand hovering over the intricately carved back of the heavy wooden chair. "What? Why, Bella, I always sit here. This is my seat." Cameron stood up, his tall frame looming intimidatingly over the table. He wore a perfectly tailored, charcoal gray suit that seemed absurdly formal and stiff for a cozy family dinner at home. He walked slowly over to me, his polished dress shoes clicking loudly against the pristine hardwood floor. "Because, Layla, things are changing around here," he said, a sickeningly sweet, patronizing smile plastered on his perfectly groomed face. "In fact, they've already changed, and we need to have a very serious, structural conversation before anyone takes a bite of this meal." Roman cleared his throat loudly, suddenly looking incredibly interested in the reflection on his silver fork. He absolutely refused to meet my gaze. The silence in the dining room stretched out, becoming thick, heavy, and completely suffocating. My heart began to pound a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs, exacerbating the pounding headache behind my eyes. "What are you talking about, Cameron?" I asked, my voice wavering as I looked past his broad shoulders to my sister. "Bella, what's going on? Why is everyone acting so strange?" Cameron stepped deliberately between me and my sister, physically blocking my line of sight and isolating me. "We've decided that this current living arrangement is no longer working for us," he announced, his voice booming with unearned authority, as if he were addressing a corporate boardroom rather than a family dining room. Your constant need for control, your domineering presence, your insistence on tracking every dollar, it's stifling Bella. It's stifling Roman. It's stifling all of us. Now that the trust documents are officially finalized, and the new era of this family is beginning under my direct guidance, we've come to a collective, unanimous decision. He paused for maximum dramatic effect, his dark, calculating eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory gleam that sent a shiver down my spine. "You need to leave, Layla," Cameron stated, his tone completely devoid of any human empathy. "Tonight, right now. You can go upstairs and pack a small overnight bag for the weekend, but we want you out of this house before we finish dessert. Your presence here is no longer required or welcome." I literally stumbled backward, my heel catching on the edge of the Persian rug. The room violently spun. The feverish, burning heat in my body suddenly turned to absolute, freezing ice. Leave my own house. Are you insane?" "It's not your house anymore, Layla," Bella chimed in, her voice trembling slightly but carrying a cruel, rehearsed edge I had never heard from her before. "Cameron explained the new trust structure to us perfectly. You signed the equity over to the family trust, and Cameron is the primary executor now. You're legally out. We want to start our new married life here without you breathing down our necks and treating us like children." I looked desperately at my older brother. "Roman, are you seriously going along with this? After everything I've done for you, after I paid for your rehab and gave you a career?" Roman took a slow, agonizing sip of his scotch, refusing to make eye contact. "Come on, Layla, don't make a scene. You've had a good run playing the boss. Let the kids have the house. You can easily afford a luxury apartment downtown. It's better this way for everyone's mental health." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me gasping for air. I was sick, weak, and standing in the very home I had sacrificed my entire youth to pay for, being ousted by a manipulative con artist who had only been in the picture for 8 months. And the most agonizing part was that my own flesh and blood, the siblings I had given up my life for, were nodding in agreement. The betrayal was worse than the illness itself. The immediate aftermath was a terrifying blur of physical agony and profound emotional devastation. I retreated up the sweeping staircase, my legs feeling like they were made of solid lead weights. Every single step was a monumental, agonizing effort. My lungs burned with every breath, and the soaring fever caused my vision to swim violently, making the familiar, elegantly wallpapered hallway walls seem to narrow and close in on me like a trap. I stumbled blindly into my master bedroom, the beautiful sanctuary I had personally designed down to the very last architectural detail, and collapsed heavily onto the edge of the plush mattress. My entire body shook with violent, uncontrollable tremors, a horrific combination of the raging viral fever and the world-shattering shock of what had just transpired downstairs. I couldn't process it. My analytical brain frantically raced through the events of the past few weeks, desperately trying to piece together how this aggressive coup had been orchestrated right under my nose. The trust documents. Cameron had brought in his highly recommended personal family lawyer to help us structure our assets for the future, claiming loudly and repeatedly that it would save us millions in estate taxes and perfectly protect the assets for Bella and Roman's futures. I had trusted my sister. I had trusted my brother. In my absolute exhaustion from working 80-hour weeks to keep our lavish lifestyle afloat, I had skimmed the final drafts, trusting that the red lines and safety clauses my own corporate attorneys had demanded were implemented. Had I missed something? Had they physically swapped the pages at the signing? Before I could even gather the physical strength to pull a suitcase from the walk-in closet, the heavy bedroom door swung open without a single knock. Cameron walked in confidently, leaning casually against the expensive doorframe, a cruel, victorious smirk playing on his lips. Bella stood behind him in the hallway, partially obscured by his shadow, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "You're moving awfully slow, Layla," Cameron said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. He deliberately pulled back his sleeve to check his heavy, ostentatious gold watch, a $15,000 gift Bella had bought him using the black credit card tied directly to my primary business checking account. "I told you, we want you out before we serve the pie. The Uber executive I graciously called for you is going to be here in exactly 20 minutes. I forced myself to stand up, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the mahogany dresser for support. "Bella, please," I rasped, my voice breaking, barely above a whisper. I looked past the monster standing in the doorway directly into my younger sister's eyes. "I raised you. When Mom and Dad died, I gave up everything. I dropped out of my university program. I worked 3 terrible jobs before I founded my company just to keep a roof over our heads. I bought you that gorgeous dress you're wearing right now. I paid for the massive diamond ring on your finger. How can you possibly do this to me?" Bella flinched, a very brief flicker of genuine guilt crossing her features, but Cameron quickly shifted his weight, aggressively blocking her from my view again. "Don't try to manipulate her with your pathetic guilt trips, Layla," Cameron snapped, his thin veneer of politeness vanishing instantly, revealing the ugly, greedy core underneath. "That's exactly why you have to go. You constantly hold your money over their heads like a petty tyrant. You think just because you pay for things, you own the people around you. Well, not anymore. We are taking control of our own lives. I am taking control of this family's trajectory." "You're stealing my home, Cameron," I said, my breathing ragged and shallow as I pulled a heavy leather duffel bag from the top shelf and threw it onto the bed. "You're a complete fraud. You've been systematically siphoning money from Bella's accounts since the day you met her. And now you think you've stolen my multi-million-dollar house." "I haven't stolen a single thing," Cameron laughed, a cold, grating, arrogant sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "You signed the papers, genius. The newly formed family trust holds the deed, and as the legally appointed managing director of that trust, I am officially and legally evicting you from the premises. You're a toxic presence, Layla. It's time for you to face reality. You have exactly 20 minutes. Don't make me call the local police to have you physically trespassed." He turned sharply on his heel and walked out, grabbing Bella's hand tightly and pulling her along with him down the hall. The door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the deafening, oppressive silence of my bedroom. I stood there for a long, frozen moment, staring blankly at the closed oak door. The paralyzing fear and the suffocating heartbreak that had been drowning me slowly began to recede, rapidly replaced by a deep, bubbling reservoir of pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. Cameron was so arrogant. He was so incredibly, profoundly arrogant and short-sighted. He genuinely thought he had outsmarted a woman who built complex software systems for a living. He thought that a few manipulated legal documents and a cowardly Thanksgiving ambush had secured him a sprawling luxury estate and a lifetime of unearned wealth. I reached slowly into my locked bedside drawer and pulled out a heavy, encrypted titanium flash drive. I turned it over in my trembling, feverish hands, a very slow, dark, and dangerous smile spreading across my face. Cameron had spent 8 months plotting this takeover, analyzing my bank accounts and sweet-talking my naive siblings. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To truly understand the profound depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the absolute foundation of our family. 10 years ago, when I was just 20 years old and looking forward to my junior year of college, our parents were killed instantly in a horrific, multi-car accident on the interstate. In a single, devastating instant, I became the sole legal guardian and provider for a terrified 12-year-old Bella and an 18-year-old Roman, who was already heavily struggling with substance abuse and a severe, destructive lack of direction in his life. I didn't have time to mourn my parents properly. I didn't have time to be a normal, carefree college student. I immediately dropped out of my highly competitive university program, moved us out of our childhood home and into a cramped, depressing 2-bedroom apartment, and started grinding day and night. I taught myself advanced software architecture and coding at night, while working grueling retail and data entry jobs during the day just to keep the electricity on and food in the fridge. By the time I was 24, I had officially launched my first tech consulting firm. By 26, I had successfully built and sold a piece of proprietary enterprise software to a major Fortune 500 company, securing enough immediate capital to buy our massive, sprawling estate in the most exclusive suburb in the state and ensure that Bella and Roman would never, ever have to worry about money or security again. I paid tens of thousands of dollars for Roman's inpatient rehab and eventually set him up with a comfortable, high-paying, low-stress job at my growing firm. I completely funded Bella's extravagant, carefree lifestyle, paying her private college tuition in full and financing her endless European vacations. I was the mother, the father, and the infinite bank. I loved them fiercely, and I naively, foolishly believed that my massive sacrifices had forged an unbreakable, permanent bond of loyalty between us. Then, exactly 8 months ago, Cameron slithered into our lives. Bella met him at a high-end, exclusive charity gala that I had generously purchased a VIP table for. From the very first time she brought him over for our traditional Sunday family dinner, every single alarm bell in my analytical head was ringing at maximum volume. Cameron was 32, excessively groomed, and possessed a hollow vocabulary that consisted entirely of meaningless corporate buzzwords. He wore tailored suits that were a little too flashy, smiled a little too widely, and had calculating eyes that constantly darted around the room, openly assessing the monetary value of every original painting, every piece of custom furniture, and every luxury vehicle parked in our driveway. "So, Layla," he had said during that very first dinner, confidently swirling a large glass of my most expensive vintage Bordeaux. "Bella tells me you're in tech. That's cute. I'm a serial entrepreneur myself, heavily leveraged in crypto assets, Web3 integration, disruptive market synergies. You know how the game is played." "What exactly is your company's core product, Cameron?" I had asked politely, genuinely trying to understand what he actually did for a living to afford the Rolex on his wrist. He waved his perfectly manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, we're in deep stealth mode right now, disrupting the entire decentralized finance space from the ground up. It's highly confidential, NDA-level stuff. But let me ask you something, Layla. How exactly is the equity structured in this house? Bella mentioned it's quite an expansive, valuable property. Have you considered leveraging it to maximize your portfolio's aggressive growth?" That was his entire MO. Vague, grandiose, entirely unprovable claims about his own massive wealth, combined with an intense, deeply inappropriate, and persistent curiosity about mine. Over the next 6 months, his toxic influence over my younger siblings became a slow-acting poison, quietly seeping into the very groundwater of our family dynamic. He somehow convinced Roman that I was intentionally holding him back, claiming I was keeping him in a subservient, emasculating role at my company just to control him. He constantly whispered in Bella's ear that I was micromanaging her life by paying for everything, expertly framing my unconditional generosity as a manipulative, invisible leash designed to keep her dependent. He systematically isolated them from me. He expertly fed their deepest insecurities. And all the while, he was subtly, masterfully positioning himself as the wise, worldly, financially savvy patriarch they desperately needed to guide them to true independence. He started calling secret family meetings without inviting me. He started advising them on financial autonomy, which ironically always seemed to involve transferring large sums of funds from the accounts I funded directly into obscure, newly formed shell companies that he exclusively managed. The absolute climax of his long, calculated con was the trust restructuring. He brought in his sleazy, fast-talking lawyer, claiming loudly to the family that it was a legally necessary step to protect our family's generational wealth from the government and excessive taxes. He pressured Bella relentlessly, who in turn begged me through tears to just sign the papers and trust her brilliant fiancé. Exhausted from a grueling, sleep-deprived quarter at work, physically drained, and desperately wanting to keep the peace in my increasingly hostile, fractured home, I had finally agreed to let the process move forward. Cameron thought those signatures on the final page were his golden, winning lottery ticket. He thought he had effectively, legally locked me out of my own hard-earned empire. He thought I was just a stressed-out, naive tech nerd who could be easily bullied, legally outmaneuvered, and casually discarded onto the street once she had served her financial purpose. He looked at my feverish, physically shaking form on Thanksgiving night and saw nothing but a defeated, broken woman. He had no idea who he was actually dealing with. He had no idea what I had done behind the scenes before I signed those documents, or the devastating, inescapable traps I had carefully, meticulously laid the very moment his slick, stealth mode startup facade began to crack months ago. As I zipped up my heavy leather duffel bag in the silent, freezing bedroom, the fever finally broke, leaving me drenched in sweat but entirely lucid. A chilling, absolute, terrifying clarity washed over me. I pulled my phone from my pocket, ignored the Uber notification, and dialed a highly secured number I had saved for an emergency exactly like this one. "It's Layla," I said into the receiver, my voice steady, calm, and as cold as absolute zero. "Execute the protocol, all of it. I want them completely ruined by sunrise." The sleek, black SUV that served as my Uber executive idled quietly at the end of the long, paved driveway. I didn't look back at the massive stone facade of my home as I climbed into the leather backseat. I couldn't afford to let sentimentality cloud my judgment, not tonight. My fever had subsided into a cold, clinical focus. As the driver pulled away from the estate, navigating the winding roads of the affluent neighborhood I had fought so hard to live in, I pulled out my laptop and connected to my secure mobile hotspot. When Cameron first brought up the idea of a family trust, months ago, heavily pushing his own hand-picked attorney to draft the documents, I hadn't just smiled and nodded like the exhausted, easily manipulated sister he thought I was. I run a highly successful software architecture firm that handles secure data infrastructure for global corporations. My entire professional life is built on anticipating vulnerabilities, identifying malicious actors, and building impenetrable firewalls. I didn't just survive the cutthroat corporate world. I dominated it by always being 5 steps ahead of anyone trying to exploit my systems. And Cameron, with his cheap cologne and hollow buzzwords, was the most obvious malware I had ever seen. So, while he was busy whispering poison into Bella and Roman's ears, isolating them from me, I had hired David. David wasn't just a lawyer. He was a former forensic accountant turned high-stakes corporate litigator, and he was the most ruthless, thorough professional I had ever met. The moment Cameron's sleazy attorney sent over the initial trust documents, I had forwarded them directly to David's secure server. David immediately found the hidden clauses, the sneakiest, most buried legal jargon designed to grant Cameron absolute, irrevocable power of attorney over the trust's assets, effectively stripping me of my ownership while leaving me entirely liable for the taxes and upkeep. But I didn't fight it. I didn't cause a scene. I knew that if I confronted Cameron then, he would just play the victim, twist the narrative, and force Bella to choose between us before I had definitive proof of his fraud. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to walk willingly into a trap of his own making. So, David and I engineered a flawless legal decoy. I agreed to sign the papers, but 48 hours before the scheduled signing with Cameron's lawyer, David officially restructured my entire asset portfolio. The sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate. I transferred the actual deed into a newly formed, anonymous corporate holding company in Delaware, completely untied to my personal name. The luxury vehicles in the driveway. I terminated their personal registrations and leased them directly to my software firm as corporate fleet vehicles. When Cameron eagerly slid that thick stack of trust documents across the dining room table for me to sign, he didn't realize that the Layla Holdings, listed in his paperwork, was a recently established, empty shell LLC. The trust he now controlled with absolute authority held exactly 0 assets. He owned nothing but the paper it was printed on. But the trap went deeper than just protecting my assets. I wanted to dismantle his entire fraudulent existence. David had spent the last 3 months quietly investigating Cameron's stealth mode startup. It took a ridiculous amount of digging through shell companies and offshore accounts, but we finally found the core of his business. It was a failing, poorly coded cryptocurrency exchange drowning in hidden debt. Cameron was desperate for a cash infusion to avoid total collapse and potential federal indictment. Using a proxy investment firm based out of London, I became his sole, anonymous angel investor. I floated his company just enough capital to keep the lights on, but the terms of the investment were predatory by design. I held the debt. I held the equity. The moment he breached the strict covenants of the contract, like, for example, failing to meet an arbitrary Thanksgiving deadline for a product launch that I knew didn't exist, I had the legal right to call in the entirety of the debt immediately, seizing all his personal and professional assets in the process. My phone vibrated on the leather seat next to me. It was David. "Are you out of the house, Layla?" His deep, gravelly voice asked the second I answered. "I'm out," I confirmed, typing rapidly on my keyboard to initiate the first phase of the financial lockdown. They kicked me out right before they served the turkey. Cameron actually gave a little speech about his new era of leadership. It was incredibly theatrical. "He's going to need a good performance for the judge," David replied, the sound of shuffling papers echoing through the receiver. The proxy firm just officially filed the default notice against his startup in federal court. His corporate accounts are frozen as of 10 minutes ago. Are you ready to pull the pin on the personal side? "Do it," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Cancel the black cards, sever the corporate vehicle leases, and David, call the utility companies. The house is legally owned by my holding company. Terminate the power, the water, and the internet at the estate, effective immediately." "It's going to be a very dark, very cold Thanksgiving for the new patriarch," David noted, a hint of dark amusement in his tone. "I'll see you at the hotel in 20 minutes with the final dossier. We have a busy morning tomorrow." I had barely checked into the sprawling, luxurious penthouse suite at the downtown Ritz-Carlton when my cell phone began to light up like a Christmas tree. I ignored the first 4 calls. Let him sweat. Let the sheer, undeniable reality of his situation begin to crack through that arrogant, unearned confidence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering, illuminated skyline of the city I had conquered, waiting for the perfect moment. On the 7th ring, I finally pressed accept, putting the phone on speaker and placing it gently on the polished marble coffee table. "Layla, what the hell is going on with the banking servers?" Cameron's voice exploded through the tiny speaker. The feigned, polite corporate tone was entirely gone, replaced by a shrill, frantic panic. "I just tried to order a case of Dom Perignon for tomorrow's brunch from the concierge service, and the black card was declined. Declined. Roman tried his card, and it's frozen too. Fix this immediately. You're still on the secondary authorizations. You need to call the bank and clear the fraud alert." I sat down slowly on the plush velvet sofa, crossing my legs and taking a deep, calming breath. "There is no fraud alert, Cameron, and I'm not on the secondary authorizations anymore. I'm not on the accounts at all. I closed them." The line went dead silent for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. I could almost hear the rusted gears turning in his head as he desperately tried to process what I had just said. You closed them." He stammered, the bravado slipping violently. "You can't close them. Those are trust accounts now. I manage the trust. I am the executor. You have absolutely no legal authority to touch those funds. I will sue you into oblivion, Layla. I will drag you into court tomorrow morning for grand larceny and breach of fiduciary duty." "You're more than welcome to try, Cameron," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly soft, perfectly calm, and dripping with icy condescension. "But you might want to actually read the trust documents your cut-rate lawyer drew up. Specifically, the schedule of assets. You'll notice that the LLC listed hasn't held a single dollar or a single deed for over 48 hours. You are the proud, absolute executor of an entirely empty, worthless shell." "You're lying," he hissed, his voice dropping to a desperate, venomous whisper. "You signed the papers. I watched you sign the papers. I hold the deed to this house. You hold a piece of paper that says you own an LLC, I corrected him smoothly. The actual deed to the estate you are currently standing in was transferred to a corporate holding company in Delaware 3 days ago. A holding company that I am the sole proprietor of. You are currently trespassing on private, corporate property. You manipulative. He started screaming, losing all composure. I have millions in my own accounts. I don't need your pathetic money. I was just using your cards for the reward points. My company is about to go public. I will buy that house out from under you just to demolish it. It was so incredibly pathetic. Even backed into a corner, his immediate instinct was to lash out with poorly executed, transparent lies. He was a cornered rat trying to roar like a lion. Is that so? I asked, allowing a small, sharp laugh to escape my lips. If your company is doing so well, Cameron, why did your primary investor just issue a federal notice of default? Why are your corporate assets currently frozen by a federal judge due to breach of covenant? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a man realizing that he hasn't just lost a game, he has been utterly, entirely destroyed. How? How do you know about that? He finally whispered, his voice trembling with genuine terror. Because I am the investor, Cameron, I said, delivering the final, crushing blow. I own your debt, I own your equity, I own you, and as of 10 minutes ago, I also canceled the corporate leases on the Mercedes and the Range Rover sitting in my driveway. Before he could even formulate a response, I heard a sharp, startled yelp in the background. It was Bella. Cameron. She cried out, her voice distant but clear over the phone. The lights just went out. The whole house is completely dark, and the thermostat is entirely dead. I smiled, a cold, satisfied expression settling onto my features. Enjoy the darkness, Cameron. It's going to be a very long night. I reached forward and ended the call, cutting off his frantic, screaming response. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, casting long, golden shadows across the penthouse suite. I hadn't slept a single wink, but I felt more energized, more profoundly alive than I had in a decade. A sharp knock at the door signaled David's arrival. I opened it to find him holding a thick, heavy leather binder. He looked exactly like a man who had spent the entire night orchestrating a legal masterpiece. Room service brought coffee, I said, gesturing to the silver tray on the dining table. Tell me we have everything. David dropped the heavy binder onto the table with a loud, satisfying thud. We have everything, and then some. The deeper my team dug into his past last night, the worse it got. Cameron isn't just a con artist, Layla, he's a serial predator. I poured 2 cups of black coffee, sliding one across the table to him. Show me. David opened the binder, flipping through pages of heavily redacted bank statements, court filings, and police reports. His real name is Cameron Vance. He has 3 separate judgments against him in 2 different states. His modus operandi is exactly the same every single time. He targets younger women who come from newly acquired wealth or life insurance payouts. He isolates them from their families, convinces them to invest in his stealth mode startups, drains their accounts dry, and vanishes the moment the money runs out. I stared at the pages, a cold knot forming tightly in my stomach. The anger was still there, burning brightly, but it was now mixed with a deep, sickening wave of protective instinct. Bella, my sweet, naive, foolish younger sister. She was just the latest mark in a long, documented line of victims. We have sworn affidavits from 2 of his previous victims, David continued, tapping a manila folder near the back of the binder. One of them lost her entire inheritance. The other had to file for bankruptcy after he maxed out credit cards in her name. The man is drowning in millions of dollars of hidden debt, and he viewed your family's assets as his ultimate bailout. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message from Bella. Layla, please, what are you doing? Cameron is completely losing his mind. The power is off, the cars are gone, and he's pacing the dark house screaming about lawyers. He says you're having a psychotic break and illegally hacking his accounts out of jealousy. Why are you trying to ruin our lives? Please, just turn the power back on and come apologize. We can fix this. I stared at the screen, my heart breaking just a little bit more. Even now, standing in a freezing, dark house, she was still desperately clinging to his manipulative narrative. He had her so thoroughly brainwashed that she couldn't see the reality right in front of her face. I didn't type a reply. Instead, I took a clear, focused photograph of the top document in David's binder, a legally certified bankruptcy filing from 3 years ago, clearly listing Cameron Vance's name, his massive debts, and a detailed summary of his fraudulent activities. I sent the image to Bella without a single word of explanation. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. It wasn't a text this time, it was a call from Bella. I answered, putting it on speaker for David to hear. Bella. What is this? Bella's voice was high-pitched, frantic, and trembling with confusion. Layla, what did you just send me? Cameron says it's a Photoshop. He says you're trying to frame him. Before I could answer, I heard the sound of a violent scuffle over the line, followed by Cameron's furious, booming voice. He had clearly snatched the phone from her hand. Listen to me, you crazy, spiteful bitch. Cameron roared, completely unhinged. The suave, polished entrepreneur was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, aggressive thug. You think some fake documents are going to stop me? I have my family coming over in exactly 3 hours for the post-Thanksgiving brunch. My parents, my uncles, everyone. You are going to turn the power back on, you are going to return those cars, and you are going to show up here with a certified cashier's check to surrender the remaining liquid assets, or, I swear to God, I will ruin your company's reputation. I will go to the press. I will destroy you. He was completely delusional. The panic had entirely overridden his logical faculties. He was throwing wild, baseless threats, trying to use a brunch with his own family as leverage against a corporate takeover. I looked at David. David just smiled, a terrifying, predatory grin, and nodded once. All right, Cameron, I said, my voice projecting absolute, calm authority over his screaming. You want me at the brunch? I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Keep your family there. Tell them to wait for me. You better bring the check. He yelled, right before the line abruptly disconnected. I set the phone down and looked at the heavy binder of evidence. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken. It was time to close the jaws. David, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my designer blazer. Call the repossession agency. Call the process servers. Tell them to meet us at the estate in exactly 3 hours. We are going to a brunch. The drive back to the estate felt entirely different than the panicked, fever-addled escape from the night before. I sat in the back of David's town car, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of absolute calm. The fever was completely gone, leaving behind a razor-sharp, diamond-hard clarity. Behind our car, a heavy, flatbed tow truck and a nondescript black sedan carrying 2 licensed process servers followed in a tight, synchronized convoy. We pulled through the wrought iron gates of my neighborhood, the massive, imposing stone facade of my house coming into view. Parked carelessly across the circular driveway were 3 vehicles I didn't recognize, undoubtedly belonging to Cameron's extended family. I stepped out of the car into the crisp, biting November air. The house itself looked dead. Without power, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows were dark, reflecting only the gray, overcast sky. I walked up the front steps, David right beside me, clutching the heavy leather binder. I didn't bother knocking. I pulled my physical key from my purse, unlocked the heavy oak door, and pushed it open. The scene in the grand foyer was a masterpiece of awkward, strained tension. Cameron had set up a lavish brunch spread on the dining room table, but without electricity, the chafing dishes were cold, the elaborate lighting fixtures were dead, and the house was freezing. Around the table stood an older couple I assumed were his parents, alongside a younger man who looked like a cousin. They all wore thick coats, clutching their crystal champagne flutes, looking deeply confused and uncomfortable. Roman was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, his head buried in his hands. Bella was standing near the arched doorway of the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy, arms wrapped tightly around herself to ward off the chill. And then there was Cameron. He was frantically pacing back and forth in his tailored suit, a forced, manic smile plastered on his face as he tried to explain away the disaster. It's just a localized grid failure, Cameron was saying loudly to his skeptical-looking father. The utility company assured me it's a priority one fix. The neighborhood infrastructure is just adjusting to the new smart meters. It's a minor hiccup in the transition of ownership, really. It's not a grid failure, Cameron, I announced, my voice cutting through the echoing room like a crack of thunder. Every single head snapped in my direction. Cameron's fake, manic smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His face drained of all color. "Layla," Cameron barked, taking 2 aggressive steps toward me before stopping abruptly when he noticed David standing right behind my shoulder. "What are you doing here? I told you to bring the check. If you don't have the cashier's check to surrender the liquid assets, you need to turn around and walk out of my house." "This isn't your house," I said smoothly, stepping fully into the room and walking directly toward the dining table. I didn't look at him. I looked directly at his parents. "Hello, I'm Layla. I'm the woman your son has been actively trying to defraud for the last 8 months. I apologize for the temperature, but as the sole legal owner of this property, I had the utilities shut off this morning to evict a trespasser." "Excuse me." Cameron's mother gasped, clutching her pearls in genuine shock. "Cameron, what on earth is she talking about?" "She's crazy, Mom, don't listen to her." Cameron yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged toward me, his hands outstretched. "Get out! I am calling the police." "I already took the liberty of bringing the authorities to you," David interjected, stepping smoothly in front of me and gesturing to the open front door. The 2 process servers walked into the foyer, their expressions entirely neutral and professional. They flanked the doorway, completely blocking Cameron's only exit. "Cameron," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper as I slapped the heavy leather binder down onto the cold, unlit dining table. The sound echoed violently in the silent house. "You thought I was stupid. You thought because I was exhausted, because I loved my family, that I was blind to what you were. I wasn't. I let you dig your own grave, and now I'm here to push you in." I flipped the binder open, staring directly into his terrified, darting eyes. "Let's talk about the trust," I said loudly, ensuring every single person in the room heard every word. "The trust you bullied my sister into making me sign. The trust you currently control. Tell your parents, Cameron, what exactly is in that trust." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. It holds the estate and the accounts." "Wrong," I snapped. "The trust holds nothing. It is an empty, worthless shell corporation. I transferred the deed to this house and all of my capital into a separate, secure holding company 3 days before I signed your pathetic documents. You own nothing." Roman's head snapped up from his hands. Bella took a slow, trembling step forward into the room. "Layla, what do you mean he owns nothing?" she whispered. "I mean he is a complete, unmitigated fraud, Bella," I said, turning to my sister, my heart aching as I saw the devastation beginning to wash over her face. "He doesn't have millions. His stealth mode crypto startup is bankrupt. In fact, I am the anonymous angel investor who has been funding it for the last 2 months. And because he failed to meet the structural covenants of my loan, I officially seized all of his corporate assets at 8 o'clock this morning." You set me up." Cameron screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He turned wildly to his parents, then to Bella. "She framed me. She used her tech money to hack my life. Bella, you know me. You know I'm a visionary." "Are you a visionary, Cameron?" I asked, pulling the sworn affidavits from the back of the binder and holding them up in the dim light. "Or are you just a serial predator? I have legally certified documents here from 2 other women. Women just like Bella. Women with new money, who you isolated, manipulated, and drained completely dry before abandoning them. I have your bankruptcy filings. I have the civil judgments against you for fraud." I tossed the documents across the table. They scattered, sliding right to the edge where Bella was standing. She looked down at them, her eyes wide, her entire body shaking violently. She slowly reached out, her fingers trembling, and picked up the top page. It was a police report filed by his last victim, detailing the exact same manipulative tactics he had used on us. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening, and completely suffocating. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Bella read, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "Bella, please," Cameron begged, taking a step toward her, his voice suddenly dropping to a pathetic, whining pitch. "Don't look at that, it's forged. She paid someone to make those. We are getting married. We are going to start our own dynasty here. Just put the papers down." Bella slowly lowered the document. She looked at the paper, then up at me, and finally she turned her gaze to Cameron. The confusion, the fear, the desperate need to believe his lies, it all completely vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, devastating realization. The spell was finally entirely broken. She reached down to her left hand. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the massive, gaudy diamond ring off her finger. The ring I had paid for. "You told me she was the monster," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying the weight of absolute heartbreak. "You told me she was controlling us, but it was you. It was always you." "Baby, no, please." Bella pulled her arm back and threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his chest. It bounced off his expensive lapel and clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. "Get out," Bella said, her voice rising to a furious, piercing scream. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Do not ever look at me or my sister again." The collapse of Cameron's pathetic empire was swift, merciless, and deeply satisfying to watch. As Bella's scream echoed through the freezing foyer, the two process servers stepped forward. "Are you the individual previously operating under the name Cameron Vance?" The taller of the two asked, extending a thick, sealed manila envelope. Cameron didn't answer. He just stared at Bella, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The process server simply tapped the envelope against Cameron's chest, letting it fall to the floor next to the discarded engagement ring. "You've been served. Notice of federal default, asset seizure, and a civil summons for multiple counts of documented fraud." Cameron's father, who had remained entirely silent throughout the entire ordeal, finally stepped forward. He looked at the documents scattered on the table, then looked at his son with an expression of profound, unbridled disgust. "I told your mother you hadn't changed," the older man said, his voice dripping with shame. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer comfort. He simply turned his back on his son. "We are leaving. Don't call us, Cameron. We won't answer." Without another word, Cameron's family filed out the front door, stepping carefully around the process servers. Cameron stood completely alone in the center of the grand foyer, surrounded by the physical evidence of his crimes, utterly ruined. "The tow truck is currently hooking up the Mercedes you drove here," David informed him calmly, checking his watch. "The corporate lease was terminated at 6 a.m. I suggest you call a cab, or start walking. Because if you are still standing on this property in exactly 60 seconds, I am instructing my client to press formal trespassing charges." Cameron looked at me. There was no more arrogance. There was no more grandstanding. There was only the hollow, terrified stare of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings systematically, precisely ripped off. He didn't say a word. He turned on his heel, his expensive leather shoes squeaking awkwardly against the wood, and walked out the front door, disappearing into the cold gray morning. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was entirely different than before. It wasn't tense or suffocating. It was the exhausted, hollow silence of a battlefield after the war has finally ended. I let out a long, shuddering breath, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system, my knees suddenly feeling incredibly weak. I pulled my phone out and sent a single text message to the utility company protocol line. 5 seconds later, the massive chandelier above us hummed, flickered, and blazed to life in a brilliant shower of warm, golden light. The hum of the central heating system kicking on echoed through the vents. I turned to look at my siblings. Roman was still sitting on the stairs, tears streaming silently down his face, his hands trembling. Bella was standing by the table, staring blankly at the empty space where Cameron had just been. I walked slowly over to my younger sister. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't demand an apology for the horrible things she had said to me the night before. I just opened my arms. Bella collapsed against my chest, burying her face in my shoulder, and began to sob with a violent, agonizing intensity. It was the sound of a heartbreaking, of a deep, profound betrayal finally being processed. I wrapped my arms tightly around her, resting my chin on top of her head, tears finally spilling over my own cheeks. "I'm so sorry," Bella choked out between gasping sobs, her fingers gripping the fabric of my blazer like a lifeline. "I'm so sorry, Layla. I was so stupid. I let him twist everything. I let him make me hate you. I'm so sorry." "SHH," I whispered, stroking her hair, feeling the familiar, protective maternal instinct roaring back to life inside me. "It's over, Bella. He's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. I've got you. I'll always have you." Roman slowly stood up from the stairs and walked over to us. He wrapped his large arms around both of us, burying his face in my neck. "I failed you, Layla," he whispered, his voice thick with shame and regret. "I was supposed to be the older brother. I was supposed to protect this family, and I just drank his poison instead. I am so deeply sorry." "We rebuild," I said firmly, holding them both as tightly as I physically could. "We rebuild the trust. We go to family therapy. We fix this together. Nobody is ever taking this family apart again."